Hello everyone, this is Andrew. Welcome to Keen on America.
On July 4th, 2026, America will be 250 years old. An anniversary that will, no doubt, be greeted with a mixture of celebration, contemplation, and resignation. In Keen on America, Andrew talks not just about the American past and present, but also speculates on its future. What, Andrew asks, will be the 21st century fate of this now venerable American Republic?
Hello everybody, I'm going to start again. Hello everybody, one more time. Hello everybody, we are in the third show of a trilogy of conversations about science, the latest science books. A couple of days ago, we did a conversation with Daniel Yon. He's a psychologist and neuroscientist in England. He has a fascinating book, A Trick of the Mind, How the Brain Invents Your Reality. He talked about something called naive neuroscientists and the creative process. He suggested that scientists should be a little more creative, perhaps like novelists or poets. And also in the last couple of days, we did a show with the New York Times writer Matt Richtel, How We Grow Up, Understanding Adolescence, which Matt got into the process of how the brain grows and how it develops in human beings and what that should and shouldn't mean to the family and to both young and old Americans. And in the third show on science, we're focusing on something that both Matt and Daniel dealt with, wonder and science. There's a new book out. It's co-authored by Alan Lightman and Martin Rees. Both are old friends of the show. Martin was actually on the show a few weeks ago. They have a new book out. It's called The Shape of Wonder, How Scientists Think, Work, and Live. Alan Lightman was actually on the show a few years ago on what we called the artfulness of the cosmos. It was associated with the book he had at the time, Improbable Impossibilities. And Alan is now back as the co-author of The Shape of Wonder. He's joining us from a small island in Maine. Welcome back, Alan. I really enjoyed our first conversation. And in many ways, we're continuing on this theme of the artfulness of the cosmos. Do you agree with Alan? Do you agree with Daniel Yon that naivety is a good quality of scientists?
Yes. I think that it depends on exactly what you mean by naivete, but I think that the unwillingness to accept received wisdom, if you can call that naivete, that's a very good quality. That's why Einstein was able to do his extraordinary work in reinventing time at the age of 26, after millennia of thinking that time behaves a certain way. He was willing to challenge that view. So if by naivete you mean the willingness to not take things at face value, then I think that is a good description and a good aim.
And you, of course, one of your best known books, it's a wonderful book, it's called Einstein's Dream, came out in 2004. When it was reviewed in the New York Times, the reviewer suggested that it kind of combined science and Borgesian realism. Einstein is a good case, Alan, of someone who, the more they understood or perhaps misunderstood or tried to understand the universe, the more wondrous they became. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that that's fair to say. There's certainly a lot that we don't know in science, a lot about the workings of the universe, and it's always very exciting when we find something that we don't understand. That's when we make the greatest progress in science. but I do do think that that scientists do have a certain natural wonder of the world, which I would call a disciplined wonder, because unlike the wonder of a child, scientists have a lot of tools at their disposal, both experimental and theoretical tools for understanding how things work, but that does not diminish the natural wonder.
Yeah, and I wonder if we might talk briefly about your co-author, Martin Rees. He's been on the show many times. I've met him in person. He's just as much of a wondrous character in person as he is in print or online. I know this is the first book you've written with him. I know you've also known him a while. Is Martin, in a way, the model of a wondrous scientist? Of course, the former royal astronomer, a man who spent his life looking through a telescope into the universe.
Well, I think that he certainly has wonder at the world. He works mainly in cosmology, which is certainly a wondrous subject when you start contemplating the beginning of the universe and how it evolved in the early stages. But he's a very distinguished astronomer, maybe the most famous astronomer alive today. And he's able to carry a lot of contradictory ideas in his head at the same time, which I've always been fascinated by that ability of his.
Yeah, in our conversation a couple of weeks ago, which was classic Martin Rees, just incredibly energetic and imaginative, he talked about, I think, and I got to be careful about quoting him, but he talked about his, I think he called it a kind of secular Christianity. I'm not sure he believes in the idea, or certainly the traditional Christian idea of God, but he certainly likes traditional Christian ritual, or Anglo-Christian ritual. When it comes to this idea of wonder, you've just co-authored this book, The Shape of Wonder, How Scientists Think, Work, and Live, Alan. Is it a wonder that can and should stop before religion? Because traditionally in our pre-scientific age, wasn't wonder most usually manifested in some sort of religious faith or other?
Yes, I think so. There's a book by an anthropologist, Fraser. I think it's George Fraser.
Yeah,
but I'm not sure thinking about.
Yeah, I'm going to look it up while we speak. Go on.
It's where he looks at the development of early religions, and especially the belief in magic and primitive peoples. And of course, the universe is a strange place, and it was much stranger a couple of thousand years ago than it is today. And in order to navigate this strange cosmos that we find ourselves in, we want to have some control over things, lightning, storms, many things that that affect us, but that seem to be beyond our control. And the invention of magic was part of that desire to have control. I think that religious beliefs may also have been related to that desire to have some control over this strange world that we live in, the belief that there's some higher power that looks after us and will take care of us and understands why things are as they are.
Yeah, and the book was The Golden Bough.
The Golden Bough. Yeah, The Golden Bough.
By Sir James George Fraser, late 19th century book or early 20th century book. Alan, in our last conversation, and I was really struck with this. I don't always say this to people who have appeared on the show before. I remember our conversation very clearly. You talked about your experience of seeing a flock of birds and what that meant to you. And it was a piece, I think, of your musings on beginnings and endings in your Probable Impossibilities book. How do you fit into this narrative? You're not as much of a traditional scientist as Martin, in the sense that you're a writer who teaches and has spent their life at MIT. You've written many acclaimed books on science, so you're more of a scientific writer than a hardcore scientist itself. But how has wonder played a role in your life? In our conversation, I was really struck by the wondrous way in which you look at the world. I mean, I'm not sure if that's always the case, but sometimes, particularly on your island in Maine, when you see a flock of birds.
Well, there's something in Hinduism called darshan. That's a word, and it means something like being open to the divine. And the divine does not have to be God. It could be, but it's something larger than yourself. And the experience that I had with looking in the eyes of a wild osprey, which I think you're referring to, and other experiences that I've had, the experience of when my first child was born, of feeling like I'm part of something much larger than myself, and being open to that feeling. And then I think that's what the word darshan means. I think that scientists, but not only scientists, many of us, probably most of us, are open to new experiences, or at least we should be open to new experiences. And I guess that is related to my idea of wonder. There was something that Einstein said, getting back to him. One of my favorite quotes of Einstein is this: the most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion that lies at the cradle of true art and true science. And I think that Einstein's meaning of mysterious there is also related to the idea of wonder, that there are things that we don't insist on understanding completely, but we sort of surrender ourselves to them. And I think by mysterious, Einstein did not necessarily mean the supernatural, but I think that he meant standing at the edge of what is known and what is not known, and feeling empowered to explore that unknown territory.
Yeah, and I think that version of Einstein, I thought, was portrayed memorably in the Oppenheimer movie, where he was presented as being more than a scientist. I mean, he clearly was the great scientist of the 20th century, but he was more than that as well. In your reading, and you've read him very carefully, you've even written a book about him, Einstein's Dreams. In your reading of Einstein, was it his greatness as a scientist that allowed him to get beyond science, or was it just a quality of lightness of being that he somehow had, whether or not he'd been a great or a not so great scientist?
Well, I would say that it was just his deep intellectuality, if that's a word, that he was a thinker. And if you're a thinker, it's hard not to think about such questions as, what is the meaning of the cosmos? Or how did everything happen? Why is there something rather than nothing? Or what is the meaning of my life? What is the meaning of my mortality? That you're drawn to these larger philosophical questions if you are a thinker. And I believe that Einstein's thinking about a wide range of issues, including science, was rooted in the profundity of himself as a thinker. So I would put that first, and then that leads to everything else.
But also wasn't, and I'm on really thin ice here, Alan, so I'm probably going to make a bit of a fool of myself, but wasn't the post-Einsteinian scientific world one which forces us to rethink our commonsensical notions of time and space? So isn't Einstein's science, by definition, if not metaphysical, certainly requires us all, whether we're scientists or not, to rethink everything about what we took for granted?
Yes, well, you're absolutely right about that. So maybe your ice is a little thicker than you thought it was. But I certainly, one of the consequences of the great revolutions in physics in the 20th century, both of which Einstein was involved with, that is relativity and quantum physics, does have the larger lesson that our intuition about the world, about time and space, about the behavior of nature, could be greatly in error. And many things happen at high speeds or at very small scales, very small sizes, that we are oblivious to. And the senses that we have, our physical senses, our vision and our hearing, our taste and smell and touch, they are very crude when it comes to the subtleties of natural phenomena. We have extended those sensory organs with the instruments that we've built, the telescopes and microscopes and so on. But even those instruments don't really convey the full nature of reality. And so I would say, just as with the work of Darwin and Copernicus, that Einstein has given us a more humble view of ourselves and the cosmos.
Yeah, it's that humility. And I wonder what distinguishes the great scientists from what Daniel Yen calls the greatly naive neuroscientists, the artists of the world. The one who comes to mind is Borges. He came up also in the Yen conversation. Yen acknowledged that he saw Borges as a master, in some ways more intuitive about the nature of things than any scientist. And it's funny, coincidental, that the review in the New York Times compared your analysis of Einstein with Borges too. Is there any difference, in other words, Alan, between a great writer like Borges and a great scientist like Einstein, or are they just characters who question everything?
Well, there are plenty of differences between art and science. I mean, the notion of truth is very different, even though both artists and scientists are seeking truth. For science, it's truth in the physical world. And for artists, it's truth in the world of emotions and the human mind. But they have different ways of testing their hypotheses. The scientist tests his or her hypotheses against physical nature, doing experiments with pendulums and pulleys and biological cells, whereas the artist tests his or her hypotheses against the life experience of human beings. When you read a novel and sometimes the characters don't ring true to you because they conflict with your life experiences. And that's the way that the novelist tests her experience, her writing against life experiences. But I think that great artists and great scientists are both creative, but they're creative in different ways, and the tests of their output are somewhat different.
Let's get on to the subject of your new book, the one you co-authored with Martin Rees, The Shape of Wonder: How Scientists Think, Work, and Live. Seems as if we're getting into the second quarter of the 21st century. It's a very odd time for science and scientists, Alan. Seems to me that on the one hand, we live in an increasingly magical scientific world, a world of AI and biotech and all these other enormously revolutionary and exciting scientific breakthroughs. But on the other hand, we live in an age where scientists are trusted less and less. We even have characters like Anthony Fauci, who's become so divisive that he's become a political football used by Donald Trump to somehow win political support. Is that fair? Why is our age, on the one hand, so profoundly scientific, and on the other hand, so anti-scientific, or at least anti-scientist?
Yes. Well, I think what you say is true, and that was one of the motivations of Martin Rees and I writing this book, because we wanted to address this growing mistrust of scientists and their institutions. I think, unfortunately, that science is, in many quarters, has been politicized, and the machine of this politicization is social media and the internet and all of the disinformation on the internet. But the message has been broadcast that scientists are the tools of financial and political interests. And of course, we saw that mistrust during the pandemic, when there was so much resistance to vaccines and wearing masks. So this is, we're in a dark age right now, where many countries, and especially the United States, have gone backwards in their ideas. I don't think that it's the entire population that's gone backwards. I think it's some of our elected leaders, and the internet has been the weapon of choice.
Yeah, some of our elected leaders, I think we know who you're thinking about. What do you also make of characters like RFK Jr.? Now he runs the
right
the health care side of American government. He was appointed by Donald Trump.
Yeah.
He's enormously controversial in attacking a lot of the assumptions about vaccine. Trump's got involved as well, making claims about, for example, the cause of autism. Why has, I take your point on social media, Alan, but why has it's got to be beyond social media? Why have science and politics become so problematically entangled?
Well, I think that part of the problem, or a large part of the problem, is the worldwide movement of populism. That's deeper than the mistrust of science itself. It's the mistrust of all so-called elite institutions. And science is seen by many people as part of the elite establishment. And then we can ask why what has fueled the movement of populism across the world. I think globalism, migration, immigration. We've always had a mistrust of the other, and immigrants are the other. But the increased amount of immigration, the increased communication with other countries, part of globalism, which again comes back to the internet, and the fears that we are being attacked from without. I think these are some of the things that have fueled populism. Of course, there's also the economic fuel, the fact that there's been a growing gap between rich and poor worldwide has been one of the fuels of the populist movement. And a big part of that movement is a mistrust of the elite establishment. And science in many quarters, I guess there are only 4 quarters.
But that's a lot. 4 can be many.
Yes.
There's no 5th corner, of course.
Yeah, but science has been associated with the elite establishment.
So
that's why someone like Robert Kennedy Jr. can get away with this baloney that he spews out about vaccines. I mean, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And none of the legitimate scientists think he knows what he's talking about. But he's on a political stage, which is connected to the global stage of populism and the mistrust of the elite establishment.
So, as you say, scientists have been othered. They've been associated with this elite establishment, which, of course, for better or worse, they are associated. Tony Fauci is a part of that. I don't quite know why he's become such a lightning rod, but he has. Is the purpose of your new book that you co-written with Martin Allen, is it to, if you like, demythologize scientists? The subtitle is How Scientists Think, Work, and Live. Are you trying to suggest in this book that scientists are like everybody else, that they're just people?
Yes. In addressing this mistrust of scientists and their institutions, we first of all want to show scientists as people that have hobbies, families, passions like everyone else. By and large, the vast majority of scientists are working to help their societies, not motivated by financial and political interests. But also we address, which is related, is the lack of understanding of critical thinking, of evidence-based thinking. And that is part of the fuel of the mistrust of scientists. I think that many people don't understand that when scientists change their recommendations and their theories, for example, during the pandemic, when some of the national health organizations were changing their recommendations about vaccines and pandemics, that theories and recommendations are changed when there's new data. And scientists work on data and evidence. And when you get new evidence, sometimes it requires you to change your theory. You wouldn't want a surgeon who's operating on you to complete an operation if the surgeon finds that their original hypothesis was wrong and your kidney was actually not cancerous. You wouldn't want them to take out your kidney anyway. You'd want them to have a change of course with new information. And that's the way science works. We work by gathering data and comparing it against our theories and recommendations. And when it disagrees, we change the theory and recommendation. But that method, which we call critical thinking, and also comparing to experiments, has been enormously successful throughout human history. I mean, that's brought us all of the modern age, computers, antibiotics, everything has been brought about by this specific method and this way of thinking in which we test our theories against experiment and data and revise when necessary.
Do you think then that we need to separate in our heads the science and the scientists. A couple of weeks ago, we had Geoffrey Hinton on the show. He won the Nobel Prize for Physics last year. He's the godfather of AI, one of the great minds in the world these days. And I was struck, on the one hand, he's clearly a genius. On the other hand, he's just like anybody else. He has his own fears and concerns and ideologies. He talked about his hope that AI would acquire a kind of female consciousness. Not everyone would agree with that. But I was a little taken aback. But then on reflection, I thought to myself, well, why would Geoffrey Hinton have any more profound metaphysical or philosophical thoughts than anyone else? And perhaps one expects too much of Hinton. I mean, not everyone can be Einstein. Is that fair?
Well, I would say that when Geoffrey Hinton or any scientist is talking about issues beyond science, that they have the same authority as anyone else. And that is they don't have more authority than other people. But someone like Geoffrey Hinton, who is a very smart guy, he can make interesting points about other fields other than science, but I don't think that he should be considered as an authority on history or philosophy or ethics or art or anything that's outside of science. And I would say that of all scientists.
Even Einstein?
Even Einstein. Now, as we were saying before, Einstein was a deep thinker, and Geoffrey Hinton is probably a deep thinker as well. So they may have interesting things to say about philosophy and art and so on. But I think we have to understand that they are not especially trained in those areas, and we should take what they say with a grain of salt.
Although you're not trained formally as a writer and as a perceiver of the magic of the world, Alan, and yet you're able to do that. So you can't be trained for everything, can you?
No, you can't be trained for everything, but talking about what's moral to do in a certain situation is different than being an artist. An artist is not claiming any authority. They're saying, look, I can put words together in a certain beautiful and meaningful way. And if you're interested, you should read these words. But I don't think writers claim to be authorities on human psychology or human sociology or any of the other things that writers write about. I think they're creating works of art, and works of art are only as strong as the emotional reaction of the viewer or the reader or the listener.
Does that mean that for you, because you've spent your life around scientists and science, and yet you are a writer, does that make what you do, both in The Shape of Wonder and all your other books, does that make it more challenging, more frustrating, or more exciting? That you are, and I use this word, it's a horrible metaphor, but I can't think of a better one, a bridge between these two worlds.
Well, repeat the question again, please, Andrew.
Given this division, if you like, between the intellectual and the scientist, between the generalist and the hardcore scientist who's able to understand the world, where does that place you as someone who has one foot in each camp, really, as a professional, very distinguished writer on science, a historian of science? You've taught at MIT. You wrote this wonderful book about Einstein and many other books, but you're not a hardcore scientist. You're not like Martin Rees or Albert Einstein or Werner Heisenberg, who we'll come to in a few minutes.
Well, you don't have to compare me to the greatest scientists who've ever lived.
I don't know. I don't want to make you feel terrible, Alan.
It's a good question that you asked. And I think that my authority to write about science and the meaning of science is based on the fact that I was a practicing physicist for 20 years. I may not be a hardcore scientist, as you say, but I don't know what you mean by hardcore. I mean, I've published, a couple of hundred papers in leading journals. I would never, ever call myself a great scientist, but I would certainly say that I was a good scientist. And I worked for 20 years as a theoretical physicist. And I think that my authority and my knowledge of writing about science stems from that experience.
Yeah, I think we need to shift the conversation before I get myself into more trouble on this one. Let's get back to the book. Let's end our conversation, Alan, on the book, The Shape of Wonder, How Scientists Think, Work, and Live. You have some profiles of prominent scientists like Heisenberg, who I mentioned earlier.
Yeah.
Another scientist you feature is someone called Govind Swarup. I'd never heard of him. How did you choose the characters in the book, and what are they all trying to tell us?
Well, we also have profiles of contemporary scientists. Those two you mentioned are both deceased. And we have profiles of as many women as we do men. And I think that the reason...
Is that kind of, jumping in here, I get myself into even more trouble. Is that a little bit of wishful thinking on your part, in the sense that science, for better or worse, has been pretty much dominated by men?
Well, I think that it has been dominated by men. I think that science and many other professions have discriminated against women. But that's a road we don't go down right now. The reason for having the portraits of a number of scientists in the book is to show them as full people, and to show how they got started in science, what interested them to get started, the kind of joy and pleasure that they get out of doing science, to show what kind of home life they have, what hobbies they have beyond science. We profile a young woman who is a theoretical physicist and also likes to climb mountains. She's a hiker. And we want to show scientists as full people, not only what they do in their science, but what they do when they're outside of the lab. And that is the really thrust behind those various profiles.
Let's end with how we can engender more trust in scientists, if not science, in the 21st century. As you note, your new book that you've written with Martin, The Shape of Wonder, is focused on rebuilding that trust. Mm-hmm. So, final question. One way that non-scientists can help rebuild trust, so that we don't have all this nonsense about persecuting Anthony Fauci or RFK Jr. claiming some scientific knowledge which he doesn't have, or God forbid, Trump becoming an authority on autism. How can we rebuild the authority of scientists in our age of science from outside, from the point of view of ordinary people? And what can scientists themselves do to, if not rebuild their own authority, to reestablish credibility as much of their business, the business of science, than of themselves?
Well, that's a great question that you asked, Andrew. And I think that podcasts like yours are certainly helping. I think that scientists, on their part, can be more transparent about what they're doing, can make their discoveries and their work more accessible to the general public. I also think that there needs to be more understanding of the nature of critical thinking. And critical thinking is not owned by scientists. I mean, when you balance your checkbook, you're undergoing critical thinking. When you try to diagnose what the high fever in a sick child means, you're exercising critical thinking. It's not something that's owned by scientists, but I think that the public needs to have a better understanding of what critical thinking is and the reason why institutions like this sometimes change their recommendations when they have new information. That message about how science works needs to be put out, not only by scientists themselves, but by people like yourself who have podcasts and have influence, science writers. So those are some of the ways that I think that we can help restore trust in scientists and their institutions.
Well, one other way people might do it is getting hold of Alan Lightman and Martin Rees's new book, The Shape of Wonder, How Scientists Think, Work, and Live. There's no more human scientist than I think Alan. A real honor, Alan, to have you on the show. I wish actually we hadn't had such a long lapse between your previous appearance, so we'll have to do it more often. Thank you so much. Congratulations on the book. And as always, a real honor, a real privilege to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andrew.